I honestly never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to choose between a roof over my head and my own parents' relentless desire to see me fail. But here I am, and I need you to tell me. Was I wrong for finally pulling the trigger on a plan that would essentially dismantle their entire reputation? For years, I lived in a house where my successes were treated like personal insults to my mother and father. But I never expected them to go as far as actively sabotaging my career by calling every single place that offered me a job to tell them I was a compulsive thief. They didn't just want to control me. They wanted to ensure I was completely unemployable and forever tethered to their basement. But they forgot one thing. My grandmother saw right through them long before she passed away, and she left me a gift that was designed for the exact moment they tried to ruin me. If your own parents were calling your bosses to get you fired just so you couldn't move out, would you have played it as cold as I did, or is blood really thicker than water? To understand how we got to the point of a full-scale legal and social war, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller household. Growing up, I was the insurance policy. My older brother, Marcus, was the golden child who could do no wrong until he moved to the other side of the country and cut contact entirely, leaving me as the sole target for my parents' narcissistic tendencies. My father, Robert, is the kind of man who believes respect is something you demand through intimidation, and my mother, Diane, is a master of the victim narrative. Together, they formed this suffocating duo that viewed my growing independence as a direct threat to their lifestyle. See, I was the one who did the cooking, the cleaning, and handled the yard work while working a part-time job during college. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a live-in servant who didn't cost them a dime. The trouble started the moment I graduated with my degree in accounting. I was 22, ambitious, and ready to finally breathe air that didn't smell like my father's stale cigars and my mother's boxed wine. I started applying for entry-level positions at local firms, and almost immediately, I noticed a strange pattern. I'd have an amazing interview, the hearing manager would be enthusiastic, and they'd tell me to expect an offer letter by Friday. Then Friday would roll around, and I'd get a cold, clinical email stating that they had decided to move in a different direction. This happened 4 times in 2 months. I was devastated, thinking I was somehow failing some invisible test, until I caught my mother in the kitchen one afternoon, laughing into the phone. She didn't see me standing in the hallway as she said, "Oh, you're very welcome. We just felt it was our moral duty to let you know that while she's bright, she has a bit of a light-fingered problem. We've had jewelry go missing for years, and we'd hate for a reputable firm like yours to suffer. Yes, it's heartbreaking as a parent, but honesty is everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. My own mother was calling these offices, pretending to be a concerned parent, and labeling me a thief to ensure no one would ever hire me. When I confronted them that night, it wasn't a discussion, it was a cage match. My father stood over me, veins popping in his neck, telling me that as long as I lived under his roof, I didn't need a fancy career, because I owed them for the 22 years of food they put in my mouth. He told me I was staying right where I was to take care of them as they aged, and if I tried to leave, he'd make sure every person in this town knew I was a criminal. I spent that night crying in my room, but then I remembered the mahogany box my grandmother, Alina, had given me on her deathbed 3 years ago. Grandma Alina was my father's mother, and she loathed him. She used to whisper to me that my father was a small man with a big ego, and that Diane was the fuel to his fire. When she passed, she left me a small amount of money in a trust, but the box was different. She told me, "Open this only when they try to take your legs out from under you, because they will." Inside that box, among some old photos, was a series of ledgers and a USB drive. My grandmother had been the bookkeeper for my father's small construction business for decades. It turns out, Robert hadn't just been a bully, he'd been a fraud. The ledgers detailed years of tax evasion, under-the-table payments, and creative accounting that would make the IRS salivate. But there was more. The USB drive contained recorded conversations. Grandma was tech-savvy for her age, where my parents openly discussed how they were going to manage me once I finished school, including their plan to use the thief narrative if I ever tried to move out. She had anticipated their cruelty years before it even manifested this way. So here I was, sitting on enough evidence to potentially put my father in prison and socially bankrupt my mother, while they were actively sabotaging my future. I decided to play the long game. For the next 3 weeks, I pretended to be broken. I apologized, I did extra chores, and I stopped applying for jobs. At least, that's what I told them. In reality, I was working with a lawyer friend of Marcus's to organize the evidence. I applied for one last job, a high-level position at a firm 2 hours away, well out of their immediate social circle, but still within their reach if they went looking. I purposefully left the confirmation email open on the family computer. Like clockwork, my mother found it. I waited by the door and heard her dial the number. I recorded her through the crack in the door as she went into her well-rehearsed routine about my unfortunate habit of stealing. What she didn't know was that the person on the other end wasn't a hearing manager. It was my lawyer's assistant, who was recording the entire defamatory statement. I had them exactly where I wanted them, but even as I held all the cards, a part of me felt sick. These were the people who raised me. Despite the abuse, there's that tiny voice in the back of your head saying you shouldn't destroy your family. So I have to ask you, before I tell you how the final confrontation went down, if you found out your parents were systematically destroying your life to keep you as a servant, would you pull the trigger on the evidence, or would you try to walk away and just hope they'd stop? I want you to pause right now and tell me in the comments, is revenge justified when it's your own flesh and blood? I decided that mercy was a luxury they hadn't earned. The following Monday, I packed my entire life into my car while they were out at a charity, lunch. Ironic, I know. I left a single folder on the dining room table. In that folder were copies of the ledgers Grandma Alina had kept, transcripts of the recorded calls my mother had made to the employers, and a formal cease and desist letter from my lawyer. I also included a note that simply said, "Grandma knew who you were. Now the IRS and the police will too, unless you follow these instructions." My terms were simple. They were to never contact me again. They were to never speak my name to another soul. And most importantly, they were to sign over the title of the small rental property my grandmother had left in my father's name, the one he'd been illegally collecting rent on without reporting it. I gave them 1 hour to read it before I made the first phone call to the authorities. When they got home and found me gone and the folder waiting, the explosion was audible from the driveway where I sat waiting in my car. My father came charging out, face purple, waving the papers. He started screaming that I was a traitor, a thief. The irony wasn't lost on me, and that he'd kill me. I didn't roll down the window. I just pointed to my phone, which was already dialing the non-emergency police line. He stopped dead. He saw the look in my eyes and realized for the first time in my life that he didn't have any power over me. My mother came out crying, trying the victim routine, wailing about how could I do this to my own mother. I just looked at her and said, "You told the world I was a thief, Mom. I'm just taking back what you stole from me, my future." The aftermath was swift and cold. They signed the papers for the rental property within 48 hours, terrified of the tax evasion evidence going to the feds. I sold that property and used the proceeds to move to a new city and start my own firm. I sent the recordings of my mother's defamatory calls to the HR departments of every company she had contacted, along with a letter from my lawyer explaining the situation. To my surprise, 2 of those companies actually reached out to apologize and offered me a second interview, though I had already moved on. My parents are now living in a state of paranoid isolation. Most of our extended family found out the truth because Marcus and I finally shared the recordings on a private family Facebook group. The pillars of the community were revealed to be frauds and bullies. My father had to pay a massive settlement in back taxes after an anonymous tip led to an audit. I may have dropped a few of those ledgers in a mailbox on my way out of town. We haven't spoken in 2 years, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Grandma Alina's gift didn't just give me a way out, it gave me my life back. It's funny how the people who claim to love you the most can be the ones most dedicated to your destruction. But I've learned that family isn't about the blood in your veins. It's about the respect and support you give one another. If you don't have that, you don't have a family. You have a hostage situation. Looking back, I don't regret a single thing. Some people might say that exposing my father's financial crimes was taking it too far, But you have to understand that they weren't going to stop until I was broken and destitute. Sometimes, the only way to escape a bully is to show them that you're capable of being much more dangerous than they ever were. I hope my story serves as a reminder to anyone out there feeling trapped by toxic family. You don't owe your life to people who only want to use it as a footstool. There's always a way out, even if you have to build it yourself from the wreckage they left behind. I'm finally happy, I'm successful, and I'm free. If you think I did the right thing by using my grandmother's evidence to force my way to freedom, please give this video a like. It really helps me know I'm not alone in this. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the underdog finally gets their day, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you have gone to the IRS, or would you have just disappeared? Share your take on this whole mess below. I'll see you all in the next story.